Hi, it's Mr. Bennett, and in this unit what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about the cell. We're going to talk about the absolute most basic part of biology, that everything in biology comes back to the cell. So in this unit we're going to give you an introduction to the cell, the organelles that are in the cell, and how the cell membrane works. Now, before we get into that though, I want to give you a little bit of history about how we discovered the cell and how we arrived where we're at today with what we know about the cell. Now, the thing about the cell you should know is all living things are made out of cells. Anything that is alive is made out of cells, no exceptions whatsoever. That up here you see some examples of cells in humans. These cells down here, these come from a mushroom, and these cells down here, they come from a plant. Everything from a bacteria to a dinosaur to a tree to a whale to a human to a dog to a cat, whatever. If it's alive or it has been alive at some point, is made out of cells. If something is not made out of cells, it is not alive, no exceptions. So in this video what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about how humans discovered the cells and what discovering the cells, how that changed biology and how that changed science. Now, humans didn't discover cells for quite some time. That we'd actually discovered the planets Jupiter and Saturn before we discovered something that's literally on the back of your hand. And the reason why it took us so long to discover cells is because you need a microscope to see them. That most of the cells in your body you cannot see without a microscope. With just the bare naked eye, you cannot see a cell. And so before we could discover cells, we had to invent the microscope. And the first microscope, here's a picture of it, was invented in 1595. That's when we invented the first microscope, was in 1595. Now we finally have the tool that allowed us to see cells. Well, even after we invented the microscope, it was a while before we found a cell, and the first person to discover cells was an Englishman by the name of Robert Hooke, and he just saw the first cells in 1663. These are his cells. This is his microscope right here. Now what Robert Hooke did is he took a cork out of a wine bottle, and corks come from trees, and trees are alive, and because trees are alive they're made out of cells. So he took a piece of cork from a wine bottle, he looked at it under his microscope, and this is what he saw. Now these little spaces here is where cells used to be in the cork. Robert Hooke saw these spaces and he thought they looked like the cells of a dungeon, and so he called them cells, and the name has stuck ever since. So the first person to discover the cell was Robert Hooke, and he did that in 1663, 80 years after we discovered after the first microscope was invented. Alright, so Robert Hooke in 1663, he saw some empty spaces in cork. Whoop-de-frickin-do, who cares? Well, the next big player in the discovery of the cell we need to talk about is a guy by the name of Anton von Leeuwenhoek. He lived about 10 years after Hooke saw the first cells. Leeuwenhoek was the first one to see cells that were alive. Here's a picture of him right here. Now what Leeuwenhoek did is he invented his own microscope. He created his own microscope. This is what it looks like. That here's where the lens would be, and he could put a sample right here and look at it using his microscope. It does not look like much, but this little microscope here has a magnifying power of 400 times. That's better than your cell phone by far. So you can see cells with a magnification of 400 power. And what Leeuwenhoek did is he just looked at different things with his microscope. One of the things that he'd do to entertain people, if you came over to his house for dinner, he'd have you scrape your teeth and then look at it using his microscope so you could see all the crap that was on your teeth. Kind of a crazy guy. Now, one of the things that Leeuwenhoek did is he took water from a river or a pond and he looked at it with his microscope. And when he looked at this river water using his microscope, this is what he saw. Give it a second. Boom. If you go and take a sample of water from a river or a pond and you look at it under a microscope, this is what you're going to see. Now everything you're seeing here is a single-celled organism. That's made out of cell, that's made out of cell, that's made out of cell. You're seeing paramecium and all other sorts of things like that. This is what Leeuwenhoek would have seen when he looked under a microscope, looked at the water using his microscope. A lot more interesting than just some holes and some cork. So these are living cells, and Leeuwenhoek was the very first person to see these living cells. He drew some drawings of what he saw underneath his microscope, and these are some of the drawings Leeuwenhoek drew of the things he saw using his microscope. And he called these little things here animalcules, which is a term that means tiny animals. So Leeuwenhoek was the first person to see living cells and realize that these tiny little things are actually alive and not just dead little spaces in cork. So Robert Hooke and Anton von Leeuwenhoek, they made some of the first discoveries regarding cells, and other scientists saw other things about cells, but we didn't really know how this idea of the cell fit into biology until the 19th century, when we had the development of something called the cell theory. And cell theory is something that all of biology is based on. And cell theory is based on three important discoveries that were made by some German scientists. These three guys here, these are the German scientists that made the discoveries that led to the formulation of cell theory, which is the basis of all modern biology. First one we need to talk about is in 1838, this dude here named Matthias Schleiden, he proved that all plants are made of cells. He was able to show after lots and lots and lots of observations that if you have a plant, that plant is made out of cells. And he did that in 1838. In 1839, this guy here named Theodor Schwann, what he did is he was able to prove that all animals, including humans, are made out of cells. And he was able to do this by making lots of observations of lots of different parts of lots of different animals, and he was able to prove that all animals are made out of cells. And then finally, in 1855, this guy here named Rudolf Virchow, he was able to prove that all cells come from cells. What you're seeing here is one cell dividing and becoming two. That everyone here, every human started out as just one single cell, a fertilized egg inside of your mama. Now, that fertilized egg divided and became two cells, and those two became four, and eventually you're sitting here today with about 50 trillion cells in your body. And every one of those 50 trillion cells in your body came from that one fertilized egg inside of your mama. So, these three observations together make up the cell theory, based on Schleiden, Schwann, and Virchow proving that all plants are made out of cells, all animals are made out of cells, and the only way you get a cell is from another cell dividing and making two cells. Alright, so we talked about the discoveries that led to the development of cell theory, but I haven't told you what cell theory is yet. Well, we're going to fix it right now. So let's talk about cell theory. There are 3 points to cell theory, and you need to know all three, and you need to be able to describe these 3 points in your own words. First point of cell theory is that all living things are made of cells. I've already taught that to you. If it's alive, it's made out of cells. Everything here, from a single-cell paramecium up to a 120-ton blue whale to the dinosaurs to the trees, all living things. Everything that is alive, everything that has ever been alive is made out of cells. That's point 1, and we know that from the discoveries of Schwann and Schleiden showing that all living things are made out of cells. Point 2 is a little bit trickier. Point 2 states that cells are the basic unit of structure and function in all living things. In a little bit more plain English, what that means is how an organism is built and what the organism can do is all determined by what cells that organism has. So let's talk about that for a second. This is the Brazilian wandering spider. This is the deadliest spider in the world. You get bit by it, you're dead in about 3.5 hours unless you take the antivenom. Now this spider can make this venom because it has these cells right here. These are cells taken from its venom glands. And these cells, and only these cells inside of the spider, make the venom. So the reason why he can make venom is because he has cells that are specifically designed to do that. Just like the spider can make silk, because it also has cells that are specifically designed to make silk. But one thing that this spider doesn't have is bones. Spiders don't have bones because he does not have the cells that make it. And so what this spider can do, make venom and make silk, he can do that because of the cells he has, and then the way he's built is based on the cells that he has. Now let's compare this spider to this chameleon. Here is a panther chameleon down here. This panther chameleon cannot make venom. It does not have these cells. This panther chameleon cannot make silk. It doesn't have the same cells as a spider. But the one thing that this panther chameleon can do that this spider can never do is change colors. This panther chameleon has types of cells that are called chromatophores. And what these guys do is they allow him to change colors. He can go orange, he can go yellow, he can go blue, he can go green. So because he has one type of cell that allows him to change color, that allows him to do something that the spider could never do. And so what an organism can do, everything that your body can do is all based on the fact of a cell that you have. You grow hair because you have a type of cell that can make hair. You make saliva because you have cells that make saliva. You make blood because you have cells that make blood. Everything your body can do is based on a type of cell that gives you that ability. So, how an organism is built and what it can do is all determined based on what cells you have. Finally, last thing to talk about, new cells are made from existing cells. This is the final point of cell theory, that every cell that is on the planet was made by another cell. This picture here is showing the process of mitosis, where we start out with one cell, it goes through the process of mitosis, and we end up with two cells. And so that's the third and final point of cell theory. So the 3 points of cell theory: all living things are made out of cells, cells are the basic units of structure and function in all living things, and new cells are made from existing cells.